Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed at driveonpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll get my 5 favorite episodes sent straight to your inbox. No fluff, just the best insights to help you drive on. Are you struggling to find real connection? You're not alone. Too many veterans feel isolated, misunderstood, and trapped in a cycle of anxiety, PTSD, and feeling out of sync with the world around them. But what if the key to healing wasn't in a pill or a diagnosis, but in your own voice? Dr. Fred Moss is here to break down how true healing happens through communication, human connection, and rediscovering your authentic self. Let's get into it. Dr. Fred, really glad to have you here. Looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really just an honor and a pleasure, a true privilege to be on the show. I look forward to our interview, and thank you for having me as a guest.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into, all that, can you maybe take us back a bit, share with us your journey into what you're doing now, mental health advocacy, and, kind of what this journey looked like for you? I like to kind of paint the picture of who the guest is before we start getting into the topic.
All right. So I'm going to take you back right to the very beginning. I arrived right here on this planet as a born healer. And how do I know that? Well, I was called on to bring love and peace and understanding to a family that was in chaos and disarray. I had 2 older brothers, 10 and 14 years older than me, and my parents. And from what I understand, as they've told me later, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of conflict in the home. And they were hoping for little Freddie to come in and be the, bundle of joy that apparently I succeeded in being for a couple of years. I'm not sure my brothers, by the way, would agree that it's lasted my whole life. But
brother, even if they did agree, no brother would admit that.
That's exactly right, for sure. And so there was an opportunity for me to learn how to be, the center of attention, how to win a crowd with a smile, how to be funny, and all those things that I was, to bring this a sense of entertainment and joy into my family. Now, fast forward a little bit, I remember being in my playpen and watching my brothers and my parents speak with each other and thinking that someday, if I was lucky, I would also know how to speak like that. I just wanted to learn how to speak and how to communicate. It was very clear to me that that's what people were passionate about. And I thought that I would probably get that in school. With my family, I was pretty precocious, and they had taught me many things that my kindergarten friends didn't know when I arrived. I had a sort of already an established, at least I won't say young adult, but old kid viewpoint of what life was about, having been taught a little bit about sex and drugs and rock and roll and, war protests and all those kind of things that were going on as a young child. And I knew how to read. I knew how to do math. I knew how to write. And so I had all these skill sets that were sort of ahead of my expected learning. So this made me kind of a terror in elementary school because I was bored all the time. And, I was a class clown and precocious. And so I talked a lot. I really just wanted to talk. And there's no teacher that I've ever had Fred as a student in elementary school who's forgot who I was. That's for sure. And it, I was kind of like I would get really good grades in the academics, and then self-control and my talking out of turn and stuff, because I just really was just leaking, like just dripping with the desire to learn how to communicate. And I thought communication was in our speaking. I have since later learned that it's really it's a reciprocation. It's in listening primarily, which is even more powerful than speaking. But I didn't know that till I got to be maybe even like last year. I don't know. It's been a while. Most people think that when you say share or communicate, you're talking about what you say. And we forget how important it is to actually be present and listen to who you're with. Right. Listening for the spoken and unspoken aspects of any communication. So I learned, in a crash course that the school was not going to be the place I learned how to communicate. And I went all the way through school, and it got worse and worse. In junior high, it was even more crippling and more constraining than it was in elementary school, and then worse again in high school. And so I figured these people learned how to communicate somewhere. Maybe it was college. So I decided to go to college, and 40 miles down the road, and they had some cool helmets and Everyone who grew up in Detroit, at least it seemed like, was super interested in going to University of Michigan. That's where I went. And I was there for a little while expecting to learn how to communicate. And although I loved Ann Arbor and learned how to communicate in Ann Arbor, I didn't love college that much. And I dropped out. And I came to California and I was like looking for what my life was about. I lasted here I'm actually not in California today, but anyways, I now live in California. I lasted in California for a little bit and then realized, there was this new industry coming out that my family had told me about. They thought I'd have a good aptitude for it. It's called computers. You may have heard of it. They thought that, that it would be a good thing for me, like Fortran, COBOL, batch jobs, punch cards. So I took a bus all the way back, and because the only computer in all of Michigan that was worth a while was the one at the University of Michigan. So back to Michigan I went, re-enrolled, got myself in there one more time. And I was in computer science, and I'm not going to do batch jobs and punch cards the rest of my life. And that's what it was all night long. It's kind of fun, but it wasn't not a lifestyle. It was like crazy,
Sure.
So I dropped out again. And this time, again, I just thought I'd bum around. I didn't know what I'd do, but I told my family I wouldn't go back to college ever again under any condition. And so my mom, agreed and said, you got to get a job. I was like, okay, whatever. So she got me some applications for civil service inside of Michigan. There was a couple different jobs available, one at the unemployment office and one as a child care worker on a mental health clinic. At a mental health facility for adolescent boys, a state mental health facility. And I took the second one because, they had an orientation. And the orientation, I wouldn't have to go to the floors. Just for 3 solid full-time weeks, they'd pay me at full-time rate to sit at a conference table and learn what I was going to do. And I just thought, well, I'll last for 3 weeks. And then I'll take those 3 paychecks, buy myself a car, and get figuring out what my life was about. And on the 4th week, my friend Paul convinced me to go up to the floors and, actually become a child care worker. And that Monday I went up there and I started realizing that this is going to be the place where communication is really important. And we're in where I'm going to learn how to communicate if I want. Communicating with these so-called kids 6 or 7 years younger than me. And just doing so with the respect of just having another human there who's bumbling and stumbling through life just like me. And, landed where they landed, not because they're worse or less than or defective or afflicted, but because that's just where they are. And it was it was beautiful to finally be able to practice the skills that I knew were required in order to be a well-rounded human being. And healing really did take place. And I actually learned to, before too long, was doing a lot of 3-week stints back to back, like I'll quit in 3 weeks, I'll quit in 3 weeks, I'll quit in 3 weeks. What was so funny about I'll quit in 3 weeks, I recently noticed it. And I've been in the field for 45 years, right? And because that was January of 1980. And I'll quit in 3 weeks has been true for the entire 45 years.
That's a lot of 3-week periods.
It's a lot. It's like right now, I still have it in my mind. Okay, I'm only going to do this for about 3 more weeks. And that's it, But here I am, 45 years plus later, and I'm still kicking along. So, I went into psychiatry, but, people are like, how did that happen? It wasn't really natural. I went into psychiatry because I really just had a major distaste for psychiatry. See, we would call the psychiatrist when Timmy and Tony were in a tussle or Jimmy was up too late, and he'd come down and talk to the kid for just a few seconds and then, talk to us for maybe 7 seconds and then go in the nursing station and write something in the chart. And we'd have to go retrieve the child and hold him down and give him, let the nurse give him this injectable cocktail of an antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, sedative of some sort. And if they were stuporous for the next 24 hours, we would call that a success story. And that just was unacceptable to me. What's really important to get here is that this wasn't back then. This has happened already hundreds of times today, right now, like today, as we speak. What is it? It's 8:14 a.m. Pacific. It's happened many, many, many times today in the United States, that exact scenario. So let's not pretend that this was the old days. This is the ancient times when we used to mishandle patients. Not at all. That's just how it is. So I had to fight back from that. And I decided that, I knew now that communication was where healing took place. And then could I go into psychiatry and bring in the healing modality of communication? Now, the truth is, it was already there. Back in the day, before 1987, psychiatry was really a conversational field. It was a field where you really sat down and got to know each other. But in 1987, there was this massive paradigm shift, and that was the advent and then the introduction of Prozac. And Prozac really shifted everything. Prozac created biological psychiatry. It created the whole weird notion of a chemical imbalance where if you're uncomfortable, it's your deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it gave us the whole complex that if you're uncomfortable, it means there's something wrong with you. Which is really just very odd, of course. We don't blame a log for burning in a fire. It's a fire out here. And if you're anxious, if you're afraid, if you're depressed, if you're terrified, if you're distracted, if you're awkward, that's called humanity. That's what we got here. That's what's happening. If you haven't found yourself to any of those corners, you're not really living a full life at this point.
Right.
Like, that's what's really here. And I kind of knew that, but that was being shoved down our throat, and we were on the front edge as psychiatrists to pathologize not feeling well. When we don't feel well, we go to a doctor and think that they should help us by no longer feeling uncomfortable. But there's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And this world is an uncomfortable situation, to say the least.
Right.
There's a tremendous amount of confusion and disjoint. People are they're searching for a purpose or searching for a reason or searching for a capacity to interrelate. Ultimately, I think what we're all looking for is to have a human connection.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we want. That's why we're on this podcast, after all. We're hoping we can create a connection, and the people who are listening to this are hoping that they can connect to the connection that we created.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's really what us humans universally are interested in. So I went into psychiatry after a few years as a childcare worker because it's like, okay, this is where I get to actually utilize my skills. My brother was already a psychiatrist, so I followed his big footsteps in and got eventually accepted to medical school and became a psychiatrist, and then got through the school during the time when Prozac was introduced, and off to residency I went and did my residency down in Cincinnati. And all of a sudden I'm building a practice, and I'm building a very large practice inside Cincinnati. And, inpatient, outpatient. And over the next several years, I've been in every single modality that Western psychiatry has to offer. I've had a leadership role in. And I've seen well over 30,000 people who would call me their doctor, at least for 1 second during that time. And, and I also had the opportunity to work all over the U.S. and all over the world. Then with the advent of telepsychiatry in the early 2010s, I was able to pipe into, rural California or Illinois when I was traveling in countries like Thailand, Bhutan, and Nepal, and Israel, Italy, France, England, and really pipe in and continue to do psychiatry. And while I'm exploring what does it mean to be a human being, and this is where I really got to, the humanity theme, the welcome to humanity, the idea that we're really all interested in the human connection. And not only that, that's where all the healing always takes place, is inside of the human connection.
Right. And, one of the things that you mentioned about communication, I don't think you explicitly said it this way, but communication really is a two-way street, right? There's me speaking right now, and I'm communicating to you in my words, but also through my body language and everything else that I'm producing here. But the other side of the equation is you have to be able to receive that. If you're not listening to me and you're distracted and it's like, yeah, okay, that guy's mumbling about something and let me go do something else. Well, then the communication isn't actually taking place, right? Because it is a two-way street. And I guess in a way, maybe communication is happening because you'd be sending a signal to me because you're distracted and you're doing something else. And I would say, well, this guy really just doesn't care. And so maybe I'm done with this guy. And I don't, that's not the case here, but this is just an example, right? But, and that's when I started this podcast, I started off, it was audio only, and we did a recording. There was no video involved or anything like that. I couldn't see the guest on the other side. And I felt very inauthentic when I was doing that because I like to be able to see the person, see their facial expressions. Maybe I'm saying something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense and they're making a confused look on their face. Mm-hmm. And then that sends a signal to me that maybe I'm way off track and maybe I need to pause for a second and see what the other person has to say, that maybe I'm going down the wrong road here. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that before. And so I introduced a video aspect of it, honestly, more for the communication style, to be able to have a better sense of communication. Because, for the listeners who are listening and can't see right now, we're not in the same room. We're not even in the same city or state or whatever. We're in different areas, and it's fine because, like you said, the technology allows you from wherever you are in the world to be able to pipe into a conversation like this. And I think it's wonderful that we're able to do that. I wouldn't be able to have this podcast if it wasn't for this type of technology, but
Right.
it honestly, it's really great. And you came to discover that in the early days when this whole video conferencing thing was still relatively new, or we
Yeah.
had it in the movies, right? That was big, but people weren't using it as often as they do now. But it gives you that sense of connection and continuity, anyways. With
Yeah.
your patients that you might see in person, but you can't because of that geographic distance. So
Yeah.
now you're able to continue that, and I think that right there speaks volumes to say that, hey, I actually care enough to try to figure out another way. I can't be there in person, so let's figure out a way to make this happen. And I don't think your mom was totally off when she said you'd get into this whole computer thing, and you're using them, for that type of purpose, right?
Well, my mom knew me pretty well. She was right, and that's what moms are for, and that
Yeah.
was a pretty good pointer. And in fact, I have learned how to effectively use this media. A couple things come to mind. You talked about this idea of, yes, we would be communicating even if we chose not to listen to each other, or perhaps even not to speak with each other.
Sure.
There's an NLP tenet that in neuro-linguistic programming that says you cannot not communicate. And that's really a cool thing to realize. There's no such thing as not communicating. And, the piece that I think I want to just put overlay to the other area about telepsychiatry, it's kind of true. I, taught a course called Mastering Telehealth in 2013, long before it was a so-called gold standard. But it was very, very clear to me, as if, chocolate and peanut butter, at least as I look back at it now, that this was a great combination, that psychiatry and, video conferencing were a match made in heaven, because that's all we really do in our offices anyways. There's no other the importance of hearing and seeing were being emphasized inside a video conference. And that's all psychiatry was supposed to need in order to get through a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So could see that the technologies and people thought they needed help all over the world all the time. And if they could just click and be with the doctor of their choice or the therapist of their choice living anywhere in the world, it seemed like it was very, like an obvious marriage that was coming down the road.
Sure.
So that's why I taught it. And in fact, it wasn't because I couldn't see them. It's really interesting. There's a phase where it was preferable. Not because it was the best second choice, but because it was the best first choice. In other words, these conversations that we have with video and audio online go deeper than the conversations that we have when we meet in person.
Oh.
If we were already meeting in person, we'd have to figure out whether we wanted sugar in our coffee or which seat we wanted to take, or, we'd have to position ourselves. We'd ask each other about our families. We would have built a much broader launching pad. And inside of these phone calls, which then turn into video phone calls, which now we call, squad,
what is Zoom and, Teams or, whatever the medium that you're using. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. We call it that. There was a point when people used to say, do you lose anything online when you're talking to someone? I suppose you do. It's nice to be able to shake their hand, but it goes deep fast. And I felt like I could make much deeper cuts inside of one video session than I could ever make inside of one session in my office.
Sure.
And I began to and that you can see somebody and they don't even know they're being seen. That's the other thing. So there's that that you don't realize that all the wrinkles and crevices and moles and pimples that you have, I can actually see when your pupils dilate, or when you, like you said, your forehead wrinkles or something, you can see stuff that without being intrusive, you can get details from the other person in a different way. And there was a point when people would say, well, which is better? And I'd say, well, if I had my choice, someone came to my office and I could put them in the room next door to me on a computer, that's how I would do it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. That
You know,
because you can really take a deep dive without all the fluff and surface level intrusions that we have naturally.
yeah, sure. And I've been on the other side of the couch, if you will, from where you sit in both ways. I've done video, I've done in person, and I can see pros and cons to both, and I can definitely see what you're talking about, because a lot of times with the video, you start off, hey, how's it going? How you doing? Good. Okay, cool. Let's dive in, and that's the extent of the fluff, if you will, before getting into the deep conversation, versus the in person. Hey, how's it going? And oh, okay. Oh, you're gonna sit here this time? Okay, fine. I'll sit over here. And then there's a whole dance that goes on in the beginning, and it's sure, maybe that is part of the human connection in the way that humans interact with each other, but I think a lot of that is unnecessary for the purpose of, and especially when you only have an hour session that you're working with someone, let's get cut to the chase and let's get to it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that this media actually encourages that, more than when we're with each other. I think we have a natural caution. We're afraid that the other person might get up and hurt us, or might get up and leave, or might be spit on, or who knows, whatever we're afraid of. When we're in the same physical space together, there's a defensiveness that can grow that isn't here so much online. And that, that's like a variant of the fact that there's so many people who think that they're publishable oratorians on social media, for instance. It's,
right.
People just open that door and just spit out whatever's coming from out of their mouth or out of their fingers and think that it's worthwhile. And that's because it's an online media. If they were in a room with people, they would be much less likely to speak their truth out loud in that situation.
Right.
Because they're behind the veil of a computer, of a pixelated screen. They feel much more comfortable just sharing what's coming from their, I guess, their gut or whatever. I'm not sure what organ it's coming from, actually.
Sure. Wherever it comes from, it's whatever you could do to make it more comfortable and more, approachable to get that out there, I think is a great thing. And especially through this show, I've dealt with a lot of veterans who oftentimes suffer from things like PTSD and other issues that sometimes just kind of naturally force them into a sense of isolation, where they don't go out. They don't want to go to somebody's office or to meet in person with other people. And doing that is a huge step for some people. And if you could say, okay, well, let's meet you where you are, and you're not willing to get out and go meet somebody someplace. Okay, fine. Do you have a computer with an internet connection? Even your phone.
Yeah.
If you can get on that, we can make this work. And okay, good. Now that's a good first step. And that at least allows that person to get the help that they need when they need it, where they are, versus just saying, well, I have nothing for you. I can't help you because you're not willing to come out to this office. I think this is a way better solution than just writing that person off entirely, right?
Yeah. If you look at the evolution of the model and what you're really saying, and I'm just picturing these vets who, some of them, maybe a little bit, technology challenged or whatever. And early on, especially in early 2020, when my practice needed to shift it instantly, we ran into a lot of people who didn't know anything about, Zoom, or how to connect the camera and how to connect their sound, and we had to walk them through. And it was normally people in their older years. Most people younger than 60 or 50, they'd already been introduced to the process. And it would interfere a little bit with the notion. And then people would get nervous. They don't want to really speak when they're online. They're wondering who's recording it. And that's actually a completely legitimate concern. 1,000,000% legitimate concern. And as you're speaking, a couple of things come to mind. I remember when I was in residency in the late 80s, if someone was talking to a TV, they would be hospitalized.
Yeah, I could see that. Exactly.
That would be criteria to give them the diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Yeah, it's either that or they're yelling at their football team or
No,
something
no, no,
to.
I'm not talking about that guy. I'm actually talking about talking to the TV.
Yeah, right,
And that these days, that's all we all do.
right,
Totally what we're doing right this very moment. We're talking to
exactly,
it. I'm not even talking to you. I'm talking to a TV. There's no
right,
you here. There's a facsimile of you. It's not the real sound. It's not I'm not hearing your voice. I'm hearing an electronic version of your voice.
hmm
Not seeing you. I'm seeing a two-dimensional picture of you that I'm actually doing all the gymnastics to have it be like I'm with you. Because the other thing was, I remember when earbuds first came out and I had my Bluetooth earbuds, my Jabras and stuff like that. I was on the front edge of that technology as well. And so I'd have these like flashing things in my ears. And people thought I was like a cyborg. People would be really, really concerned about it. And I might have a conversation with somebody without having even a phone in front of me.
yeah,
So now I'm walking through the streets talking to people, and many people at the time, early in the technology, didn't even know that there was such thing that would allow for that. So there was another way to look entirely like psycho.
sure,
That was talking to nobody. So
yeah,
either talking to a screen or talking to nobody, both of those things have now been normalized at such a high degree because we're all doing it.
yeah,
And when in fact there was a point where if that's what you were doing, it was an instant psychiatric hospitalization. Why is this really important? Because psychiatry is totally variable.
yeah,
It's totally nebulous. It's totally artificial. Like
interesting.
the edges of this are, because if it was a symptom then, it should be a symptom now, but it never was a symptom.
Hmm.
It's arbitrary on the edges. And when we really, really get that, we can see that there's a reason to be very suspect about what these diagnoses are really saying about whether there's something wrong with us or not. Because once the mass population took on speaking to TVs, like we're all doing all day long now,
hmm
or speaking to our earbuds, talking to nobody, or in fact, talking to ourselves, like you get, oh no, now if someone's walking through the street, they don't have any earbuds and they're talking to themselves, they're crazy. But if they do have earbuds and they're talking to themselves, then they're not crazy.
right,
It's like if they're watching TV and they don't have their camera on and they're talking to the TV, then they're crazy. But if they're talking to their TV and they do, it's like these are
it's just
arbitrary edges of nothing.
it's just the presence of that technology is the difference between crazy and not crazy. And
Supposedly,
supposedly, that's the
maybe
public perception, really, right?
yeah,
It-
if we could start getting that maybe there's no difference between crazy and not crazy.
that that could make, yeah, I don't know what the implications of that would be.
The implications of that would be that we're all human
Okay,
and none of us know what the hell we're doing.
that's true.
If we
Um,
don't know what they're doing and what we're doing, and there's never, ever been a compelling definition of what normal is, never. Tell
mhm,
me what normal is.
yeah,
You don't have one.
no,
You don't have an answer for this one.
right.
If we don't know what normal is, and what kind of audacity has us actually declaring out loud that that is abnormal?
Right. And to that point, I think normal is an evolving creature in and of itself,
Of course.
because normal for one person who might be a happy, friendly, caring, outgoing type of person, that's their normal, right? But then you have another person who's a little bit more reserved, they're not quite as energetic, they're maybe a little bit depressed. Well, that's normal for them. They're both normal. Both of
Are
these
they?
people are normal.
Then-
Normal being kind of like, what is that person's baseline? What can you expect from that person?
So
right?
if that baseline is more like the majority,
Mhm.
then we call them normal.
Right. And that's, I think, the public perception, to your point, is that's what we consider normal, and
Because most people do it.
most people do it. Exactly.
It's not there's no other reason you get that.
Right.
Castle made in Zen. You get this is not what normal is. It's what's been established over time by an agreement reality of a population in a prevailing conversation.
Yeah.
When we really get that, we start seeing that the edge between normal and abnormal kind of fades. None of us know what the hell we're doing.
Right.
That's okay. That's where Welcome to Humanity steps in.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Welcome to Humanity, and let's kind of dive into that a little bit and see, where that is going to take us.
All right, sure. So, Welcome to Humanity is kind of a, more recent, in the greater scheme of things with my career, it's sort of a more recent development. And it's about, I don't know, it's like 6 or 8 years old now, and officially, but the whole idea is there's almost nothing in life, any experience in life, and any experience in ourselves for which the response, welcome to humanity, isn't appropriate.
Okay.
Whatever you got going on, whatever that is, your body's churning, or you're afraid, or you're tired, or you're depressed, or you're anxious, or you're terrified, or you're awkward, you're distracted, you're angry, whatever it is. Welcome to Humanity is one way to look at that.
Sure.
And I really, when I was looking for like a brand name, there was some others ones that I considered. I considered one called Global Madness, because it seemed like, I really like Global Madness. It's a cool name. And there was a documentary that got initiated with that name where I was going to be like the Anthony Bourdain of mental health and go see how mental health is delivered around the world, which of course I did, but I didn't televise it. But Welcome to Humanity was like an overarching umbrella that seemed like it worked very well. And so what we really have here is the power gradient that gets established when I, as a psychiatrist, get to decide whether or not they're you or them have anything wrong with them. And then when I say, this is what's wrong with you, you say, okay, thank you, doctor. And you walk away thinking that that's what's wrong with you, mm-hmm. is a completely funky, completely arbitrary, and in most cases, completely damaging interaction, in my opinion.
Okay.
So when I give you from the top of the hill a diagnosis that says you have this alphabet soup, and I realize, by the way, especially speaking to the population that's in your listening audience, that like post-traumatic stress disorder, or anxiety disorder, or substance abuse disorder, all the disorders and deficiencies and afflictions that have been tossed around with psychiatry are very present in some people. The idea is that it can be recontextualized so that one sees that there's a route out of this, that a true healing can take place. Psychiatry is not based on healing. Psychiatry is based on maintaining and containing symptoms and slowing down the deterioration of condition. But that's not an honest way to look at how to help somebody, because the best way to realize about how to help somebody is maybe there was nothing wrong with them in the first place.
Sure.
If there's nothing wrong with them and you can look across the table at these people or, whatever, right? And you're not always at table. You can be walking with them or be on the phone or a Zoom and actually get that there's nothing wrong with this person, even if they're certain that there is. Some people, they think, oh no, there's something wrong with me. You're not me. You should know there's something wrong with me. Well, first of all, that's not entirely clear at all. Even if you know there's something wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with you, because one of the very important features of being human that seems to be almost universal as well is that when we look at ourselves, we think there's something wrong with us. So it's almost a sign of normal to know in your heart of hearts that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
And when you start realizing that that's just a trait, or back to WTH, which is the essence of a Welcome to Humanity.
Well, and when we look at ourselves and we say, hey, there's something wrong with me, I think that's going back to what we were saying before, where we're looking at what does normal look like in society today? What am I different from everybody else? Am I from the people that I see, that I interact with? Okay, well, if I'm not like them, then I must be abnormal. There must be something wrong with me. Yeah. And that's not, to your point, that's not necessarily true. That is a indication that, hey, you're human and you're going to have a different perspective, different outlook, different reaction to certain circumstances than other people might, because, well, hell, you're human. And
exactly.
We all have different reactions to things. I mean, two people could have the same exact experience. They could be standing side by side, experiencing the same exact thing, smelling the same smells, seeing the same sights, all of hearing the same sounds, all those senses, they're processing the same way, or sorry, they're receiving the same way, but they process them different because maybe they had an earlier experience in life that taught them that, hey, this situation is not all that scary. And so I'm okay with this. But then that other person who's standing right next to him never had that experience, that prior experience, and they are terrified. They're pissing in their pants because they're just so afraid of whatever the situation is, right? And both reactions are normal.
Exactly.
Or they're not
They're human.
a bad they're not bad. There's nothing inherently wrong with those reactions. You're teaching me not to use the word normal, and I think that's a good thing.
Only because you don't know what it means. It's okay. You could use it if you could define it. That would be,
sure.
I won't mind at all. If you give me a firm definition of that word, then feel free to banter that word around all day long.
No, and you're 100% right, because the best definition I could come up with is something that is evolving and constantly changing, and so that's a moving target in and of itself. And so how could you really come up with that definition? But so you're right. So yeah, you have two people experiencing the same thing but having completely different reactions. I think things like PTSD and other disorders like you were talking about are completely acceptable human reactions to completely crazy, abnormal situations that you're thrust into. There's nothing normal about war. No. It's not a thing that you expect on a day-to-day basis. And when you go into war and you have to see death and destruction and all of those things that go along with it,
cause death and destruction,
or even cause it. Yeah, absolutely. Those things are not your typical thing that your average person is going to have to experience on a day-to-day basis. And when you do experience it, your reaction is going to be, like you said, a human reaction. And whatever that reaction may be, right?
Right. And we another fallacy is that we compare our insides with everyone else's outside. So we don't ever really get what it's like to be you. I don't ever, and I'm just watching you through this communication in whatever train I'm on, in this case online, and we already get that I'm not even with you. I'm with a two-dimensional pixelated image that reminds me of something that might look like you.
Yeah, right.
And then I'm listening to that. So, so there's so much limitations between us really getting what another person's experience is, including the fact that we don't even know how to communicate experience. We don't even know how to communicate experience because our language is two-dimensional and thread-like, and experience is multi-dimensional and vast and diverse all at the same time. So we're experiencing multi-dimensional diversity at any given moment. And when we speak, the best we can do is send a laser light through that multi-dimensionality, picking on a particular topic that we chose for ourselves to communicate. And thereby, in some ways setting aside all the rest of the experience that's going on at any given moment that we have, chosen not to speak to. So there's no real great way to, it doesn't seem like in our present, at least in the present format, in the present contextualization of communication, to reconcile that problem, but except to realize that we're not effective communicators either, because we're counting on this two-dimensional thread-like voice to, put together ideas on the fly without any kind of rehearsal. Say what you mean what you say, but don't expect, say it on time, let it flow out of you when it shows up. And hopefully it doesn't need a bunch of editing by the time it spits out of your mouth, because we spend so much time correcting ourselves. I didn't really mean to say, I said this, I didn't mean to say that. As if we're able to edit ourselves at the pace that the listener would want us to. Because we're counting on the listener to actually get something close to the words that I have put into place.
Right.
And somehow I'm hoping that I say what I say and that it resonates over there, that you're present enough, or that you agree with the definitions of certain words or phrases enough that we are saying the same thing when I say what I say and that it lands over there. How do I know it's landing over there? Well, I'm kind of measuring your head nodding,
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty arbitrary too.
Sure.
That's just a piece of nonsense. Your head's nodding. Your head could be nodding, and you could be thinking about the Philadelphia Eagles, for God's sake. I don't.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right, because that could definitely be arbitrary. And when you have an experience that you're trying to communicate, in a way, you're trying to paint the picture in the mind of the listener, or maybe even the reader if you're writing it down, or whatever the medium is that you're using to communicate this. You're trying to paint that picture in a way that very accurately portrays what your experience was. But anyone who's an artist knows that painting a picture, like what I have in my head and what comes out on the canvas, may be two different things, but I want you to see it the way I am thinking of it. And that may not happen because
Exactly.
the wrong brushstroke or the wrong, whatever the medium is that you're using, it may not be 100% perfect. And so just like painting with a brush on a canvas, the words that you use, that you speak, are very much an art form to try to get that out in a creative way to paint that picture for someone, especially in a therapist kind of setting where, say, I'm coming to you and saying, hey, I have a problem with X, Y, or Z, and I am trying to communicate it to you. You ask me some questions to try to figure out what's going on, and I try to explain it, but am I explaining it effectively? And am I getting that across to you? And in your mind, you're painting this picture, and you're painting a picture that may be, oh, well, he must have PTSD because, well, he was in combat and he experienced this, that, and the other. And maybe it's depression from something else. And some of the symptoms may just overlap. Just like I may use the same color to paint a tree as I do the grass, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I'm picturing what it is that you're saying. I'm trying to paint that picture myself and communicate it back.
There's some deeply inherent obstacles and hurdles and challenges in our capacity to communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fine communicators are able to not only get their ideas across, but to listen effectively to others and have a broad landing pad for what somebody else is trying to experience or someone else is trying to communicate. And so communication is that skill. And I'm really happy with little Freddie and his playpen, realizing that at 3 years old, that someday this is where all the magic is. Sure. I feel very grateful that I saw that early on, and that it's now such a critical piece of what we do every day as a human. And, we're swamped with I don't know about you, but my time is just utilized surviving and getting myself online, managing my threads or managing my emails or managing my, texts or managing my responsibilities or my calendar or my conversations in such a way, whether that's in the written word or in the typed word or in the read in the read word or in the conversational word. There's just so many challenges each and every moment to get through all these things. Now, life is hard and life is hard. And, are there 100 reasons to be nervous? Yeah.
Yeah.
How long would it take us to come up with 100 reasons?
I'm sure we could. There's tons of things, and
5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure that wouldn't take much time at all to come up with that. But I think, to your point, there's a lot of reasons for a lot of the things, nervous or depressed or whatever. And again, back to your point, welcome to humanity.
Welcome to humanity. And there's, what's so cool about this is that there are a series of practices and tools and exercises that we can put into place that mitigate some of those natural default concerns that life is impossible to deal with. You see, when we meditate, for instance, or we become mindful and we start really watching our gratitude and we start watching what we put into our mouth and drinking and nutrition, or what we do with our activities, whether that's art and music and dancing, or what kind of nature walks we take, what do we do with other people, who do we hang out with? what kind of reading, what kind of pampering are we doing? What kind of, are we keeping ourselves as our own king or queen that we get to take care of? Do we treat ourselves as well as we would want to be treated by others? Most people would say no to that, by the way. If anyone talked to me as nasty as I talk to myself, I would immediately unfriend them forever.
Sure.
And, that we start really looking at, like, what does it really take to be an effective human being? And part of it is to steady ourselves and to realize as often as we can that we don't have to be driven down the rabbit holes that we're seduced to go down, that we don't have to become our experiences, that we can be right here. And, although we have thoughts and they can be disempowering thoughts, and we have, feelings and ideas and emotions and physical sensations, we have all those things, but we don't have to become those things. We can actually experience those things and then be like, thank you for sharing. Welcome to humanity, back to the center. And we start really realizing that, wow, everybody's going through this, and maybe there's nothing inherently wrong with me. And, it's funny. Psychiatry is a funny field this way because there's some opposition to this that I run into with many clients. For instance, they don't come to me for their initial visit because they want to see if there's something wrong with them. They come to me to get confirmation that there is something wrong with them. And what's really interesting about that, like the corollary to that, is I think psychiatry is the only subspecialty in all of medicine that if you tell that people that there's nothing wrong with them, they get pissed.
Right. I can see that because, well, let's take it back a step here. So somebody is going to come to you or some other psychologist and they have something that they are perceiving is wrong. I never used to be this depressed. I never used to be this whatever. And so something has changed and I don't like it and I want help with that.
Yeah.
And so that's why they're coming to you. And so I can totally see where you're coming from, where they get pissed when you say, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, this is welcome to humanity. This is a human reaction. Now, I think where the issue comes in is someone is coming to you and saying, hey, I don't like how this makes me feel or whatever. And they want to know, okay, what do I do about it?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where the issue comes in, where they're maybe perhaps not satisfied with there's nothing wrong with you diagnosis, because in their mind something is wrong, and that's why they're there in the first place, right?
Well, it's funny, one of the things, and it might be counterintuitive, one of the ways to really get to the bottom of this is to connect with that person and get exactly what their experience is in life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually listen carefully and have that human connection. Because once I've worked in prisons and jails. I've already told you I've worked in many different modalities over the years.
Sure.
Orphanages and homeless shelters and nursing homes and, inpatient units and outpatient units and residential treatment programs, methadone clinics, rehab clinics, I don't know, it goes on and on.
Yeah,
and
sure.
The way that someone heals when they think something's wrong with them is to have one other person get it. That's the cure.
Okay.
When someone really gets it, have you ever noticed that when someone really gets you, wow, it's just like, oh yeah, that person actually gets it. Yeah. And there's an immense relief at that moment. So it's not really like there's something wrong with you. It's like there's a loneliness aspect of it. In other words, something wrong with me. It's uniquely me. I can't communicate it effectively. No one can understand. That's really where the pain emanates from, is from the simple idea that no one can understand how bad I feel.
Sure.
But when I'm able to share that or be shared with that, like my lifers in the prison, in the maximum security prison, when I would connect with them and actually get their world, sometimes I would be the first guy who had done that for, I don't know, decades. And level of healing that takes place instantaneously far exceeds the potency of any therapy or any medication that's ever been invented by a human being when you connect with another human. So the most powerful way to help someone mitigate the pain associated with there's something wrong with me is to actually connect with them and realize that we all think there's something wrong with us.
Sure.
I get it. I get that you're highly uncomfortable with your experiences. I really do. I get that you think that you weren't this depressed before and now you're more depressed than ever and you so-called can't control it. when we apply these mindfulness and gratitude and nutrition, all that big long list, affectionately called the Moss method that I have compiled, there's 20 things, and we start applying those things to our life, we become disconnected from anything in the outside world creating who we are in the inside. That's really fantastic when we can decouple those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about that connection and getting that understanding of what that other person is going through. And it made me think about conversations I've had with other veterans who won't go to a therapist who is not also a veteran or a combat veteran,
100%.
and because I think that just makes it that much easier to get that level of understanding.
It's all it is.
You know, I've been there. I've been in combat. I've had bullets going both ways, you know, and that's something that your average person may not be able to understand quite as much. That fear, that, you know, all of those emotions, that how do you describe fear or the panic or the rage or whatever the emotion is? How do you describe that to someone who's never been there, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, yeah, you know, first of all, no one's ever been where you were.
Sure.
As we've already established.
Yeah.
No one, even that guy next to you in the foxhole, he wasn't with you.
Right. Yeah, he was with himself in that moment.
Himself near you. Yeah. That's right. So no one has ever been in your shoes.
Sure.
No one has ever been in your shoes. And so there is a fair amount of imagination and this idea of a broad brushstroke of what's really here. And not only in how you say it, but who you be. Like if all of a sudden we started to create the rage or the anger or the despair or the hopelessness or helplessness that you experienced in combat, we start talking about that. It's sort of like, can I talk to a woman about pregnancy? Well, I can. I've just never been pregnant, you know. And I get that. And can I talk to a combat veteran about his experience? The answer is yes, I can. But I can't pretend or think that I know what that experience is through my own experience.
Right.
However, what we do share is this thing called humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that overwhelming thoughts have been managed by each and every one of us is really important to get. An overwhelming, like incomprehensible, unmanageable, unexpected, traumatic thought process or experience. Most of us can relate to experiences like that. Sure. Then they say, well, except mine was bigger. Mine was more.
Right.
Mine was louder. Mine's more dramatic. Or mine's more terrible. Not only did I watch that person, I caused that person. And therefore, you don't understand. Like sometimes I'm most of the time, I'm not very happy with medicating people. I don't really like doing that. And nevertheless, I've written over 100,000 prescriptions in my life.
Sure.
So, each one of those prescriptions have hurt me. Every one of them, I feel like the zing, little bit of a zing. It's almost like snap the rubber band at the very least, you know? And, I have some, significant, significant problems with my experience with the field. So how do I explain, what it's like to some people? It's like, well, yeah, how do you manage that? How do you manage listening to people all day? How do you manage, watching all the chaos and disarray inside of the psychiatric industrial complex? And I want to tell them, I don't just watch it, I order it.
Yeah.
There is a difference that I want people to know. It's not like I was just immersed in the system. I was calling all the shots for the system because the system would have it no other way. And some of those shots I were causing were not in the best interest of either me or my clients. And that's what psychiatrists are frequently asked to do. And most psychiatrists just wash away their own pain about that and realize they wouldn't take the medicine or the treatment that they prescribe to others on a bet. They would never take the medicine that they would prescribe for others. Mm-hmm. And we start looking at, well, there must be something wrong with that whole theory, right? If I was openly prescribe that for you and your child, then I wouldn't take it under any conditions. that must suggest that there's a problem somewhere, and maybe there is a problem somewhere. And psychiatry is a very broken industry for sure.
Yeah, I do think there are certainly some issues like what you were just describing in the industry altogether.
Sure.
Maybe in the entire medical industry, there may be some other similar issues with that. I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but there certainly could be some issues. But when you have someone coming to you and you're able to connect with them, on that human level, and whether you've had a similar experience or not, again, to your point, no one has been in my shoes, no one's been in your shoes or anybody else's shoes. So we don't know exactly what those experiences are, but I think we get a little maybe creative liberties when it comes to that picture that gets painted when you've been in a similar situation where you now can realistically picture what that person is describing a little bit easier than if you've never experienced that situation ever and you have no idea what that person's even talking about.
I think you're really just speaking to the desperation of the illusion of being connected with.
Yeah.
Again, the whole point here, the whole point that why those vets, for instance, would not be interested in talking to somebody who wasn't in the battlefield is because they pre-assume that I won't be able to connect with them.
That's right.
Because what we all already know inherently is that the only way to heal is to connect with another human. We already know that. And that's really at the bottom of this whole thing, is a human connection. At the heart of all healing is a human connection. And that's where Welcome to Humanity, that's where my books, Find Your True Voice, and my other book, The Creative Aid, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression, as well as the courses that I've taught and the transformational restorative coaching that I do, and the Undoctor, which, undiagnoses, unmedicates, and undoctrinates people. That's where it all comes. It's all from this idea that ultimately all about communication.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. As you're talking, the communication piece of it, I feel like I've been in certain therapy sessions where I've said something, I thought I was describing things very well, and I was getting my point across effectively, and then on the other side, the response that I'm getting is, so what I'm hearing is, and they fill in something completely different from what I was trying to say, and it's like, I'm pretty sure the words I used were accurate. I'm pretty sure, like, I painted this picture as well as I can, but I'm having trouble with that, and so you get somebody who understands the communication piece of it, and you get that connection. Yeah, then you can start healing, and
it's an exhalation of relief, right?
Yeah.
When you feel like, oh yeah, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
Maybe even in this conversation, there's been moments where you're like, oh yeah, he talks a lot, but he gets it, or something like that. And then that happens, you're like, you can get charged up, you can get fired up about continuing communication, and
that's right.
Staying on track with another person who actually is able to resonate harmonically with your experience.
Right.
And that experience, that resonating frequency, I only have one word for it, man. It's humanity.
It's humanity. Yeah. That's a beautiful way to think of it. Yeah.
It's the truth.
It is.
Why can I relate to anything you're saying? There's only one resonating frequency that we truly share.
Yeah.
And that's humanity.
That's our humanity. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, because all of our experiences and I said this before on the show, I really do believe that we are the sum of our experiences, good and bad, everything that's happened to us throughout our life gets us to be the type of person that we are right now. And my experiences and your experiences and somebody else's experiences are all going to be different. And we're going to be who we are because of what we've experienced.
It's fascinating. And another piece to that, maybe that we can, I'm sure this is aligned with what you're saying, is we are not a prisoner of the habits that got us to now. In other words, our next move is not in any way connected to all the moves that we've made up until now. We have a choice to make any of hundreds or thousands or even millions of decisions right this very second.
Yeah.
And they do not have to be sourced or dictated by the past that got us to the present.
Yeah, 100%. And just to kind of paint, this is my attempt at painting that picture of what you just said for the listeners who maybe need a little guidance on that. But for somebody who maybe has a weight problem, they're overweight and they don't exercise, they don't eat well, all those types of things. So tomorrow they wake up and their typical routine is they get out of bed, they make breakfast, and it's this big, huge breakfast with foods that aren't good for you, sugary, bad foods, all these kind of things, and they don't exercise and they don't do, anything like that. They could choose to keep doing that because that's what they've always done, or they can choose to have something a little bit leaner, and then they can choose to, hey, let's go for a walk instead of sitting here and scrolling on social media for the next hour or so. Let me go for a walk and get some exercise. And is that going to immediately, the next day, are they going to be dropping weight? No, but they're moving on that path to making those better decisions. And the more they do it, the easier it becomes, and the more of a habit it becomes, I should say. And then that just becomes kind of
normal,
the new them. Yeah. Not to use the word normal, but that becomes the new pattern and who they are. And that's, I think, a great way to look at it is you don't have to be a prisoner to what has happened to you in the past.
Not at all. You really don't. And look, there's this thing called neural pathways that people talk about, or habits, or compulsions, or impulsiveness, that has us leaning back on previous experiences, whether or not they were effective when we did them the first time. Mm-hmm. So, sure. Familiarity has a certain strength. Like, like if I've already smoked every day up until now, I might as well smoke now.
Yeah.
If I've already done this addiction up every day up until now, then I might as well do it again because I'm an addict, and I can. So I get the search or I get the itch. I want to steal. I'm going to steal something, or I'm going to watch some porn, or I'm going to, like spend some money, or I'm going to take some drugs, or smoke some weed, or put something up my nose, or whatever, drink this. And I get it that experience, like it might show up again, like, oh, there's a lot of pleasure every time I take a shot of tequila. Okay, I get that. Tequila does. I'm not one to put down tequila. I appreciate the power of tequila immensely, and that doesn't mean that right this moment it's time for me to take a shot of tequila. I do have a choice to some degree, either over managing the impulse to give myself the scratch of the itch or the dopamine bump that these things can sometimes cause. And that's the good news. That's not just bad. That's like not bad news. That's like, dude, I don't have better news for you. That's like seriously good news.
Yeah, because you do have the choice. The power is all yours, whether or not that thing that has possibly been causing whatever the problems are that you're experiencing, you have a choice to do something different. Yep. Whether it's drugs or overeating or doing whatever negative vice that you might want to put out there, you have a choice to just not do it. And it comes down maybe to willpower and what you're willing to do to put in that work. But that's really up to you. And I think that is a kind of a beautiful thing.
It is. It really is a great thing. And how do we give people access to being who they know they self to be at the core? It's cleansing away all the mud and all the cobwebs, all the rust, all the excess baggage that we have put on this core person of ourselves over time. The crack in the cement, it's got larger and larger. We never turned around and repaired it. And now we're finding ourselves in habit-filled lives doing what we do. And in fact, some of them seem like they're more gripping than others. You have to do something. And why not scroll Facebook? Facebook is a nemesis for me. It's a nemesis. I am like, I hate this shit. And and before too long, like probably within the next hour, I'll be checking Facebook. And I'm like, I can't. And so they win. There's a race out there for our most precious commodity, which of course is our attention.
Yep.
And the technology that has gone into creating that that race is extremely effective in, controlling or in offering something that's compulsive and easy enough. Like with a little click of my thumb, I can see, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 more reels. And
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about any of those reels, really.
Right.
They don't affect my life at all. Some of them are a little ticklish. They're fun or funny or interesting or
Right.
amusing, but they're what a total waste of time and money and energy. And I certainly could be doing something more effective. And I choose not to. And it's like, I feel at the mercy of those things when in fact what you're saying and maybe what I said earlier is I'm not really at the mercy of those things. There really is a sovereign self here, who has agency and capacity to choreograph and CEO my whole life.
Yeah.
And I could choose to do something different.
100%. Yeah. And just like, look back 50, 60, 70 years ago, if somebody wanted just to be alone in peace and quiet, turn off the television, take the phone off the ringer, like you didn't have to have all those distractions. You just turn things off and it's done. Now you have your phone, it's in your pocket. And every time, somebody comments on something or whatever, you get a little buzz on your phone. And now, oh, well, I got to go check that. And that's how they conditioned you, right? We could turn off our phone, but
Sure.
God forbid you might miss something,
Right.
And so that's the mindset. But
Right.
again, you have the choice. And I think that maybe is the takeaway here is we do have a choice.
Yeah.
And it's just what are we choosing to do, and how's that worked out for you?
Yeah.
That I think that's the question we all have to ask for ourselves. So before we wrap up, though, I know you mentioned some of your books and some of the virtual training and other things that you have going on. Where can people go to find out more information about who you are, what you do, and where they can find this information?
Yeah. So, there's a couple things. Number one, I certainly have a well-established website at welcometohumanity.net and another entry website at drfred360.com. But important pieces here that I think are really critical is I think I've been looking to help people in whatever ways I can in non-medicating, non-diagnostic way. As you can imagine, I find diagnoses to be traumatic in and of their own selves as
Sure.
well. And I think that people are looking for a label because they can explain the parts of their life that they're not proud of. And that's really how that goes. So I give you an alphabet soup of a label. You walk away like, hey, doctor was right. I have bipolar disorder. I have PTSD. I have social phobia. I have narcissistic. I'm on the autistic spectrum. Yay. It's like, dude,
Yeah.
welcome to humanity. It's just it. I just get that.
You're
And so one
human,
of the
right?
things I've discovered in the last 6 months is that when I help people with financial literacy of all things, when I help people actually get their money right, when I help people actually, have an understanding of where their money is coming in, how they're spending it, how they're saving it, how they're investing it, and really helping people get a solid ground under their feet about how finances work. It's more healing than anything I've ever seen in psychiatry. So most people don't even realize that they're missing the security that's available inside of their financial system. So I am now part of a group that actually is helping people get that free educational model out there. And I've been in that group for a number of months. I get that, whenever this episode airs, this will have expanded considerably. And I ask people to, if you're interested in learning more about this free educational system, the free educational platform, about how money works, it can be life-changing. I mean, we really learn what's really here. What is the amount of money I need to be financially independent? Or what does it really mean to own a business? Or what does it really mean to invest in a particular vehicle, knowing that it's going to bring a handsome return and has no chance of losing? What would that be like if you knew that, that the investment you're making is bringing a substantial return with no chance of losing and in a tax exempt status so that you're not ever going to be taxed when you get the money out. It's that could change people's lives drastically, even if they're at minimum wage. So I'm really excited about that in my next career. And so if I do quit psychiatry in the next 3 weeks, that's where I'm going next.
That's where we could find you. Okay.
That's where you can find me, 1,000,000%. Exactly.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Fred, I do appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of these insights. It's been, for me anyways, it's been eye-opening and helping me to understand really some of the issues that people are dealing with. And I think it's incredibly helpful, hopefully for the listeners as well. I think it will be. So thank you again for sharing your insights and coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, let's build a community. That's what my Mighty Networks is about. It's like, let's build a community of people who are curious and interested. Even if you disagree, it's okay to respect somebody who says something entirely different than what you think is real.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way you don't know what's real either.
That's true. Yeah, none of us
don't.
do. And that's, I guess, part of being human. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome.